the jobs are going to really involve not maybe the creation of content, but the analysis and the decision making that goes, with that content. So the knowledge work is going to change almost to an even more important piece of knowledge work, and that's analysis and decision making.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work. Thanks again for making this one of the most downloaded podcasts about the future of work. If you enjoy what we do, please like, comment, and share in your favorite podcast app. And we'll keep sharing amazing conversations like the one we have for today. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. I'm also an investor in and advisor to more than 30 AI-first companies. And as you know, a firm believer in the power of technology to make humans better. If you're passionate about changing the world of work, or maybe just looking for your next adventure, let's talk. We learn from AI thought leaders weekly on this show. And of course, the added bonus is yet one AI fun fact each week. Today's fun fact: in a new report published this week, Goldman Sachs Research estimates that generative AI could raise global GDP by 7%, or almost $7 trillion over a decade. It identifies three key areas where generative AI is likely to have a major impact. First, on productivity, by automating tasks that are currently performed by humans, such as writing code or generating creative content. Second, by introducing new products and services, whether that's designing drugs, developing marketing campaigns, or creating new forms of entertainment. And last, by creating personalized experiences, like recommending products tailored to a user's individual interests, or suggesting relevant articles based on a user's background. Now, the report also warns that the benefits of generative AI are only achievable if we pay attention to the risks of job elimination and, of course, the spread of misinformation. As always, we'll link to the full article in today's show notes. Now, shifting to this week's conversation, today's guest has created one of the largest communities for conversational AI and generative AI enthusiasts, which means everyone listening to this podcast should consider getting involved with his events. Pete Erickson is the founder of Modev, which hosts the popular Voice and AI conference, and also others, including the Gov AI Summit. Pete started the company back in 2009 and has since produced over 150 events across 89 countries that have connected more than 125,000 people. Pete and the team have created communities for tech companies like Samsung and Amazon. Today, we get a glimpse into the mind of a great entrepreneur who is focused on making AI education accessible to everyone. And without further ado, Pete, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the podcast. Let's get started by having you share a bit more about your background and how you got into the space.
Yeah, Dan, thanks so much for that introduction. And it's really wonderful to be here. And congratulations as well on your success with this podcast and what you're doing. It's really important to be connecting people to so much information that we have out there. And you do such a good job. And I'm thrilled to be here. So a little bit about me. I am one of the lucky entrepreneurs that had a profession really find me. I had a background in technology. I was part of three startups for about the previous decade before I started Modev. I went through the .com bubble. I was living in Seattle at the time, helped burn through a lot of VC money. And then I worked with a startup that had a very technical innovation called a connection optimizing cryptographic overlay, very technical term for a mesh routing protocol, which brought me to DC, where I was working with three-letter agencies to help improve communications, like in covert operations. It was really, really an awesome experience. And that's what got me to DC from Seattle, where I met my now wife, Sabrina. So that's an important part of the story, because I moved to DC to get married right about the time that the iPhone had come out. And I was looking for my next thing. And I didn't really know anybody in town. So I started a meetup community called Modev to bring developers together to talk about mobile applications and the opportunities that, smartphones were going to present. And that quickly blossomed as the meetup got popular. And we went from, a dozen people in a pizza shop on January 21st, 2009, to just a year later having, well over 1,000 members and being encouraged to put on my first conference. So I sort of found myself into this profession of convening people and building conferences. But once I got a taste for just how important it is to bring people together, I really took to it. And I came home from our first conference and I told my wife, I said, I'm going all in on Modev. This is our full-time gig. And I haven't looked back since.
Why does the conversational AI community need a resource like Modev?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I'll talk a little bit about the genesis for Modev. People need to get together. It took us a few years to kind of figure out really what is our why. We knew we were creating meetups and conferences and bringing people together, and that was great. And I figured out kind of how to monetize that. But also I figured out how to monetize it while also maintaining the authenticity of that human connection in that community and the need to get people together. I really learned the importance of that. Go back to that first meetup. After we sat for 2 hours, 12 people in a pizza shop, a woman came up to me, a developer, and she said, I learned more in this 2 hours than I've learned in the previous year. And she said, you've got to keep doing this. And that really stuck with me. So our first conversational AI meetup was in 2011, the month that Siri came out on the iPhone. And we spent a whole meetup evening talking about the ways that conversational AI could actually improve mobile applications. But the challenge with that was that the APIs were not accessible to developers at that time. So while Apple was taking the lead on conversational AI at that time with Siri, they really weren't letting developers have access to it, and they wouldn't still for many, many years to come. In fact, it was 2015 that Amazon Alexa released the very alpha and beta versions of the Alexa into homes, and you had to actually sign up and get accepted to get one of the early devices. And then it wasn't until the end of 2016 that an API for developers to start to build Alexa skills would be available. So, in comes Modev. We helped Amazon in those very early days host their very first developer workshop. It actually took place in Arlington, Virginia. And then we turned that into a nationwide tour where we went to 15 different markets and we trained all kinds of people how to build their very first Alexa skill. And actually, it was more than that. It was really, what is conversational AI? So we found ourselves in this conversation that was much more than about trying to train developers. It was about introducing a new modality that really had not gone mainstream yet. And Alexa was the first opportunity for developers to do that. So why is that important? Going back to that very first pizza shop, when people get together in person, they really accelerate their learning. It's amazing what happens when you're getting that kind of that face-to-face instruction. We all know that there's, countless hours of YouTube videos and other, learnings on LinkedIn and everything else. And they're all great. I think digital content, I use it all the time, but there's something special that happens when you get people together. And that's our role. Our why is that we believe human connection is vital in the era of digital transformation. That's our why. And so what do? We bring people together to make that connection happen and accelerate that learning. So that's why we believe what we do is important, because we see the results.
So Pete, think about the conversations that the communities that you developed were having in 2009 timeframe, maybe entrepreneurs developing early skills for Alexa versus the conversations that are happening today around generative AI and voice first AI. What's changed? Is it just a continuum of technologies, or is there something different this time around?
Yeah, I think there's a fundamental shift that's just happened. And while, the conversations going back to 2009 with mobile applications, it's very reminiscent. So a lot of the folks that were part of the very early Modev days, we've been having conversations about how this feels somewhat familiar. Smartphones offered a completely different modality for engaging with customers. Before that, it was all web-based, and the phones that were out at that time, they had text and voice with some very limited applications. But smartphones just represented a new way that brands could reach customers. And what's happened now is there's another modality, and that modality is through conversational interfaces, whether it be chat or actual voice. Or through other kind of visual cues. So there's a lot of ways that conversational AI presents itself. It's not just chat or voice. There's a lot of visual cues. In fact, when we're engaging with applications, a lot of times we don't really want to get back text or a voice. We just want to see that the application understands us and it's making moves for us. That's all conversational interface. And, what's changed is, now you've got just so much more infrastructure ready to go. You can have an idea, create it and launch it and scale it, in a very, very short period of time. So I'd say the opportunities are bigger than ever. And also I would just add this, Dan, and that is that, conversational AI, even a year ago, it was really a nice to have. So while a lot of, big, let's say contact centers or customer service or people that do a lot of, customer experience engagement, they were understanding that there's an ROI around conversational AI and they were implementing solutions. But what's happened today is that every boardroom is asking every C-suite, what are we doing about generative AI and large language models? What's our plan and what's our play? So now conversational AI is a must-have because it's an integral component to anybody's large language model or generative AI effort. So today, conversational AI is a must-have, and we're seeing the results of that must-have era that we're in for conversational AI, both from developers, designers, product leaders, marketers, and that's why we feel good about where we are as an organization relative to this conversation and the types of events that we're putting on, because we want to help people with that journey. We're in a must-have era, and we want to make sure people have access to that information, and that information comes from human beings. It gets us back to our why. We want to make sure we just connect everybody to have this conversation.
So versus connecting early iPhone and Alexa developers in a pizza shop 14 years ago versus the conference that you're going to be hosting, Voice and AI, in DC in September, what's changed about the nature of how communities form, the conversations? Are these AI enthusiasts in September going to be talking about the technology or the cultural implications, or are we talking about governance? There's so many topics under that kind of rubric of conversational AI. What's the nature of the conversation going to be like in September?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. I think it's multifaceted. I think that all the conversations are happening at the same time, right? And you're seeing the results of, legislation in different parts of the world. So the EU is certainly grappling with this, and they tend to be a little more conservative on the legislation that they pass. So a lot of people watch what's happening in the EU. So anybody that has a global presence or a global market, is really, really tuned in right now. So nobody can get away from the policy conversations that are happening. That's going to be part of the conversation. There's going to be the technology. And the technology conversations tend to fall into, kind of large bucket areas. Of course, we got large language models and foundational models, and there's a lot of conversation around that and really understanding that, right? So you've got proprietary models now, and you've got open source models, and you've seen what's happening with Anthropic and the amount of funding they've raised, and a bunch of former OpenAI people sort of taking a different approach, and you've got Hugging Face on the open source side as well. So a lot of people are going to be having conversations about the core technologies. And then let's not forget about the conversational cloud leaders that have been in this space for some time. And on the back end, a lot of them have been tapping into large language models for quite some time. This is not new for them, but it wasn't an integral part of their marketing before. But the conversational cloud vendors that, Gartner covers that space very well, but a lot of them are going to be on site as well. And there's going to be a lot of conversation about which way should I go? What, how much horsepower do I need for what I'm trying to get done? So whether I'm a bank or a retailer or I've got an entertainment media property, everybody's going to be really trying to figure this out. And it really comes back to that, we're kind of in this must-have era. We have to check a lot of boxes. We do have to understand policy implications. You're seeing the privacy or the copyright issues with Sarah Silverman and her lawsuit against OpenAI, right? About fair use. That's a big issue, and it's gonna probably go to the Supreme Court. So a lot of conversations right now happening around this technology because it's a foundational or fundamental shift in the way that we build products. So yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting year. And as the years go on, Dan, I do expect that, we'll normalize. There'll be, kind of the normal conference tracks around generative AI and conversational AI. And, it won't be hodgepodge of topics where sort of everything's on the table right now, but it sort of is because it really impacts everybody, whether you're building the products, funding the products, fielding the products or using the products, everybody's, everyone's got new toys to play with and to figure out.
So you're in DC, as was Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, not too long ago. And you referenced the Sarah Silverman pending lawsuit of OpenAI. I'm curious to get Pete's opinion. What is the right way to regulate AI, and even across the topics, all the different potential ramifications of the technology? There are a variety of topics to even regulate. If you ruled the world, how would you regulate AI?
Wow, that is a really great question. And I think that, maybe the short answer is I don't quite know, but here's some things I do feel strongly about. I do think fair use is important. I think that, taking somebody's works and ingesting them into your large language model so that then you can repurpose. I do feel like that's a thorny area. It's not black and white by any stretch. I mean, fair use is, you went to a museum and you were inspired, so you went home and created your own art based on what you saw. That's fair use, and you can do that. You can't copy a piece exactly. And people argue on the side of the large language models that, well, that's what they're doing. They're ingesting and they're looking at these things, and then they're creating their own works based on that. But I do feel like it's not just black and white. I think there's a challenge there. And I think there needs to be potentially some kind of opt-in for people that have creative works to be a part of large language models. But I actually don't even know quite what that looks like. I definitely feel like there has to be a disclaimer on output from large language models, especially synthetic media. So if it's a synthetic media that's coming out, like let's say it's a voice or a video, or it looks like a human being, there's got to be disclaimer that that's a synthetic representation of a human voice or a human body. I do feel like that's really important. And right now there's no regulations around that. So you can deep fake people, and that we've seen so many examples of that. But I think that's a pretty low hanging one that I would, if I could, had a magic wand, I'd say, absolutely, we need that. We need that for our own safety, to be honest. And that also needs to be, watched closely and regulated. And there does need to be, legal protections around those kinds of uses. So look, AI represents a super challenging area, but we've come across these in the past. We've overcome them. If you go back to the advent of movies, there was not a rating system before, but the motion picture industry got together and created the standard, and that standard helped. It helped parents. It helped people understand which movie was right for them. And I know it's not a direct comparison, but it is possible, and we're going to need to get there with AI. Good
analogy. There was also a time before cars had seatbelts, and at this pretty much all agree that was a good innovation.
We all agree it was a good innovation, but even the car manufacturers were against it because they didn't want to spend the money. But yes, and Sam Altman, when he went to the Hill, he said he wanted regulation. Well, very smart of him to say that. And
quite
the
self-serving.
Yes, very self-serving, but very smart. I think that they want to be part of crafting and creating those regulations, and I think this, the Sarah Silverman lawsuit is a good example of that they want to try to get ahead of these things. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But I also feel very strongly about, I believe we really got it wrong as an industry with social media. It's still a very challenging area. And I've got tween kids, 11 and 12. So I am very, this is very close to my heart. And we've seen the challenges with social media. We got it wrong. We still haven't got it right. And so I'm hoping that with AI, we can start to get this more right out of the gate.
So my kids are 13 and 15. So we're in the same situation as parents, thinking about the implications, which are far reaching. The EU recently proposed in their AI Act a quite stringent by US standards set of regulations, mostly pertaining to model transparency, model accuracy, and proposing a framework for how the vendors that provide these AI first products need to inform anyone who's using them about how the models were created, kind of the integrity of the models. It's likely that some of those regulations or stipulations will seep into the United States as well. What's your sense about what obligation vendors have who are providing these AI first technologies, not just on the consumption of the data, like the Sarah Silverman case, but throughout the life cycle of the decisions that those AI first systems are making?
Yeah, I mean, you want to believe that the vendors are going to do the right thing. It becomes very challenging, especially if companies, if they're publicly traded, there's so much pressure on profit and profitability. I'll use another analogy, talking about the EU, with food dye. My wife and I, when we went to visit a family in Belgium when the kids were younger, and we just loved it there because there was no food dye in anything. It's outlawed in the EU, and you get the same products. They look the same. The candies look the same. They have the same colors, but they just build those. To create those manufacturers those candies without food dye. And there's a way to do it, but in the U.S., it's all food dye everywhere you go. I mean, you go to Trader Joe's if you don't want food dye, by the way, pro tip. But it's so frustrating as parents because it's like, come on, you could do the right thing. You have to do it for the EU. So just do it in the United States. So I'm a little bit cynical because I know that experience. And I'm like, yeah, but look at GDPR. I mean, I think that everybody recognized that they need to satisfy GDPR standards with their privacy policies. And, but I think that, anywhere they didn't have to do that, they didn't, even though I think GDPR was really good. It was hard for advertisers. So I get it. It makes it harder for ads and harder to be targeted and all those things. So, it's hard to say that the vendors are going to do the right thing, but I'm holding out hope that certain vendors will figure that out and say, hey, we actually adhere ourselves to a higher standard than even the EU. And it's because we want to be perceived as a better technology. I mean, waiting for somebody to make that play. And, people are doing it in sustainability. They're doing it in diversity and inclusion. They're doing it in other areas where they can maybe go above and beyond. But we're also at a very difficult time with that. We've seen, examples of, Bud Light and others, getting themselves all, caught up and end up losing on all ends. But let's hope that certain vendors, take this higher road. And the open source platforms, I think, are making that claim a little bit. But let's see. Let's hope.
As an AI enthusiast, I believe that vendors do have the best interests of humans at heart. It's more than just capitalist-driven incentives that's driving this exciting innovation wave. The thing that concerns me is I recall, turn back the clock, whatever it was, 3-4 months ago, when OpenAI introduced ChatGPT 4, the 4 model, and Greg Brockman from OpenAI, I thought was in a very kind of raw moment open about the fact that the team that developed GPT-4 did not realize everything that it was capable of doing. How do you think about the fact that, even though the vendors have good intentions, there is risk given that the technologists themselves don't know the boundaries of the technology?
We seem to be a little bit in that era. If you look at full self-driving on cars, and I'll maybe call out Tesla, they've had full self-driving, capabilities in those cars for 5 years, I think, 4 or 5 years. And that technology is not perfect by any stretch. And there are examples where, it probably hasn't done what it was supposed to do and people died. I think that those are all being litigated. But I think that we've also seen examples of, hallucinations in AI and really impacting a lot of things, and court cases, and maybe people with mental health issues or eating disorders, and sort of like the AI not doing what, it was really intended to do, or having the outcome. We do seem to be at this era where fielding technologies before they're really, really ready is sort of being accepted in some regards. And, it just seems to be where we are. And I think that I don't always think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I do think it's a challenging thing. And I think that that's where like a lot of disclosure needs to come in, where if you let something out in the wild like that, you've got to have, some, that disclosure and, opt in to use it, knowing that this technology isn't maybe fully ready and ready to go. But it seems to be where the race is, right? You look at what happened with Microsoft and Bing, right? Microsoft very aggressively got the Bing chat out there powered by OpenAI. And boy, that thing was not ready. But sort of like, what did it cost them? They got a ton of press. Everybody wanted to use Bing. They actually wanted to see the thing go a little bit crazy, right? Everybody now suddenly, before we were not talking about Bing, Dan, a few months ago, maybe 6 months ago, but they got it out there. And so I do sort of think it's a calculated risk for companies to get things out into the wild, let the market find those bugs and those challenges, and then, make the course correction, knowing that you've got a bunch of users now on board.
So as a parent, when you're having conversations with your kids who are going to enter a workforce where it's likely their colleague will be a bot, it'll be a very different workforce than the one you and I entered.
Mm-hmm.
What are the skills that you think are future-proof that you encourage your kids to be learning today, assuming that they will be actively collaborating with machines in the future?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I watch my kids. They don't have phones yet, but they have watches. So they both have an Apple Watch. I think we got them for them. Maybe it was 2 Christmases ago. So they've had them for a while. And what's wild is we'll be driving in the car and my son will be having conversations with Siri, getting information, or like if he has any kind of question, he asks Siri on his watch. And I turned to my wife, I think just last week when we were in the car, I said, can you believe our kids are, they have an AI assistant on their wrist that they can ask any question. And she said, no, it's just kind of crazy. So what's going to happen is they're used to this idea already of having a bot and having an assistant right at their, on their wrist or in their fingertips. And they're going to go into their, they're both in middle school. They're going to go through high school they're going, to middle school and high school in the post chat GPT era in education. Also a huge topic that's going to be discussed at Voice and AI. They're going to be used to the idea of this sort of living in this co-pilot world. Whereas the AI used to be behind the screen and it used to do things for us that we really couldn't see, right? So it would serve up for us our social media feed or serve up for us the ads that we want to see when we search. It was doing all this work behind the scenes, but now it's actually jumped out with us and we've got this co-pilot. Our kids are going to graduate from high school and then go into college already knowing that and come out of college. So what are the jobs that I think are going to be important in the future? I think that it's about the jobs are going to really involve not maybe the creation of content, but the analysis and the decision-making that goes, with that content. So the knowledge work is going to change almost to an even more important piece of knowledge work. And that's analysis and decision-making. And look, AI is going to be making a lot of those decisions as well. But at the end of the day, the human beings are going to, play an integral role in brands and building products and, fielding products. We're still humans. We're going to interact. We're going to travel. We're going to go places. We're going to eat at restaurants. We're going to do all those things. But, AI may be creating content, but human beings need to decide really what to do with that content, how to serve it, how to engage. So I think the role of knowledge worker is going to change a little bit. The role of developers. So if any of my kids want to go in and be software developers, I would highly encourage that. The role of developer is going to change into more of, you've got to know code, but you've got to know orchestration. And developers are some of the best product and some of the smartest people I've ever worked with are in the software development side of things. They're going to elevate in terms of their importance, I think, in organizations. So we're going into a whole kind of different era. And I think, between now and I guess 10 years from now, when they're going to be getting out of college, imagine where we're going to be. And I think predicting the future is hard, but But I think that, watching them now and navigate their life with a co-pilot already, I think they're set up for that. And I think, we're going to watch our kids, embrace it and do things with it we can't conceive of right now.
Fond of saying on this show, I believe AI is the new UI and voice is the new app. Now you're about to host a community or an event but with the most sophisticated leaders in the conversational AI space. Do you agree with that? And if so, is there a time when voice is the predominant computing interface?
Well, we can speak, 140 words a minute. We can type 40 words a minute. It's a lot more efficient interface. I think that what we've also seen is over the last 10 years, a lot of people do text to speech, right? So when they text message their friends, they're talking. So we become accustomed to our voice as a primary interface. And with so many other technologies sort of coming into market at the same time, so super high-speed processors, 5G high-speed networks, it's more realistic to really use our voice because that input can be captured, analyzed, and responded to in real time through artificial intelligence. So I do believe that voice is a killer app for a lot of folks, but it's not always, the output isn't always going to be voice back to us. I think the output is going to be in a number of different ways, but as long as we can tell that the AI that we're talking to understands us. I mean, look, when we talk to people, we get visual cues, right? Nod their head, shrug their shoulders. I love when when we go to India and people do this thing and I don't even quite know what it means, but I love it because it means something different depending on the conversation. But like we get all these visual cues and we don't need to hear stuff back. And what's going to happen with AI is it's going to get better at that as well. So I do think voice is a really, really top modality. I know Tobias Dengel, the founder of Willow Tree, is coming out with a book all about this. I'm looking forward to that, and he'll be talking about that at the conference coming up. And so I'm down. I'm all in on AI. I'm all in on conversational AI and generative AI, sort of coming together under one roof. We've got a blog post just about to come out about that, really about this intersection of generative and conversational AI. So it's an exciting time. I mean, it's such a shift right now, Dan. And like I said, I love that you're hosting these conversations because that's how we move things forward and that's how we learn.
We're publishing audio only. So for those who couldn't get the visual, the body language, that was Pete doing like a touchdown dance, referring to like a little shimmy that they apparently do in India. Is that how you describe it?
Yeah, it's sort of like it's a side to side nod shake, and it's like the coolest thing. And like I said, you learn more about like that, but I would say that that's unique, right? It's unique amongst that culture, but it's very cool. And AI will start to understand us, as we, and have those kinds of cues back to us as things evolve. But yeah, I think that we are in this era. I mean, it's a voice first era, I think, that we're moving into. And I mean, what's feeding a lot of these large language models is us talking every day. So right now they are ingesting, billions and billions and billions of lines of voice communications through all kinds of platforms right now and getting smart. Yeah, here we are. Here we go.
Hey, Pete, I got to get you off the hot seat, but you're not going anywhere before answering one last question for me. We're taping this in the middle of 2023. Let's fast forward to the middle of 2033, and you're getting ready for the whatever number that will be, a voice and AI, a conference in 2033. What number is it?
Well, it's 23. That would be 33. So that would be our, I think that would be our, if we only did it once a year, that would be our 17th conference in 2033. But so where will we be? Well, I think that we are going to be really in another era of visualization of everything that we're doing. I think that we're seeing that now with Apple. And I don't anticipate that we will be all wearing what look like goggles. I think the glasses that we get from our optometrist are going to have smart capabilities. So we're going to blend a visual component to our engagement, and the smartphone will have evolved a lot. We may still carry a screen with us, but the engagement on that smartphone is going to change dramatically. Yeah, we'll be accessing AIs, probably just, through, I don't know if you saw the movie here, but I thought that movie was very prescient with regards to kind of where things are going. So we'll have our co-pilots with us, and we'll have our favorite ones. We'll probably have different brands that we, engage with, and maybe different personalities, or I don't know. It's going to be a fascinating era for sure. But I just think that the blending of the visual, the voice, the experiential, and certainly on the generative side. So if you think about entertainment, I don't think two people are going to see the same movie. I think you're going to be able to, generate a movie experience. You'll probably get it still from a studio, because there's probably going to be some pretty cool characters and things, but probably a lot of new studios as well. I mean, if you look at what happened with Netflix and sort of created this whole new category of streaming companies, when the studios were, definitely already around and had distribution, but Netflix came along, and Netflix and Amazon Prime started winning Emmy Awards, and Oscars. That was pretty interesting. So we're going to be in a kind of a different era for experience in 10 years. And, I'm here to see it and here to be a part of it.
In the ensuing years, we're going to have a lot of new topics to unpack. And I hope maybe you'll come back and join us for another episode, and we can see how we're doing on our prognostication.
Dan, I would love to come back. And I just want to tease out, we are launching a new community at Voice and AI, and I'm excited to announce that here. It's called developers.ai. So it's a domain I've owned for some time, and I've been working on the model and the release, but it's going to be coming out. And think of it as an accelerator for every developer in the world. Developers need to advance their careers. They need to connect with other developers, and it's an exciting time to be a developer. But AI is going to play an integral role in a developer's life, from here on out. The co-pilots are already here. But it's about, with the co-pilots and with AI, how do I become a developer, and how do I, what's that profession look like as time goes on? So developers.ai will be launching at Voice and AI. I'm just excited to kind of drop that little teaser here at the end of the show.
I'm glad you did. You heard it here first. Developers.ai soon to launch. Anything else you want our audience to learn about the Voice and AI conference?
Yeah, just go to voiceand.ai. And if you are at all interested in understanding the intersection of generative and conversational AI, meeting people from around the world, OpenAI is doing hands-on training for, data training. But Google and NVIDIA and Microsoft and great, conversational cloud leaders are going to be there. All the major brands are going to be there talking about what they're doing and what they're working on, from Walmart, GM, Walgreens and on. It's an opportunity to connect with real people and human beings, and talk about this new exciting world at the intersection of generative and conversational AI. So come check it out, and we would love to see you in Washington, D.C.
Pete, it's been an absolute pleasure. I look forward to more of these conversations up ahead.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Well, Pete, we've published over 200 episodes of this show, and I can say with full transparency, this is the first time we've talked about food dye in Belgium. So among the many other things that we learned today, that was very insightful.
Good. Pulled that one out in real time. So
brilliant. Well, that's all the time we have for this week.
Thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely. Yep. For this week on AI and the Future of Work. But of course, we're back next week with another fascinating guest.